Hello everybody, it is I, Eternal Flame here, and today I'm here to talk about the immense potential that Yuta, Akotsu, and Gojo's body versus Sukuna actually has as a fight, because while a lot of people have been talking about whether this fight is going to be interesting or not, or who's going to win against this fight, and why Sukuna should absolutely win, or why Sukuna should absolutely get destroyed considering we can say that Sukuna is put in, versus Sukuna still being the final villain needing to be taken out by Yuji. But today we're going to talk about that stuff as well as much more, because I really want to talk about the fight itself, and why I think this fight has some of the best potential to be an amazing fight in JJK, and why I'm just really hyped for the fight. This fight is going to be very similar to when I was talking about the potential that Maki versus Sukuna have, where I'm going to go over things like the narrative themes, the general themes of the story, as well as just what could happen with this fight and why I think this fight is going to be so much more interesting. But I think this fight has a lot more potential when you look at the general themes and narrative that can be put into this fight and can really be used in order to answer previous questions that were asked about in the past. For example, one of the questions that can be used to answer in this fight is the question that Geto asked Gojo so long ago about whether Gojo was the strongest because he was Gojo Satoru, or was he Gojo Satoru because he was the strongest? Is his identity his strength, or does he have strength because of who Gojo is as a person? Is Gojo the strongest because of his powers, or is he the strongest because he himself is using those powers? And that is something that the fight can actually answer, especially considering the fact that we also know that Yuta Akotsu is going to have access to all of Gojo's knowledge, which should put Yuta and Gojo currently right now on an even playing field. If not, maybe Yuta you having an even greater advantage if Yuta's curse energy did transfer over to Gojo's body, which is something we don't know about, but we also don't know the details of Kenjaku's curse sneak and how that functions fully yet, so it could be possible it did, it could be possible it didn't, but at the same time, basically, they should be put on an even footing other than who they are as people. Because even if Yuta Akotsu does have all of Gojo's memories, even if Yuta Akotsu does know how to use the 6 lives plus limitless basically on paper from everything that Gojo has done, it won't actually answer the question on whether he will be as good as Gojo or not until we actually see them in practice. It can also answer the question on whether Yuta Akotsu is ready to inherit Gojo's dream or not inside of Gojo's body, because Yuta Akotsu might be able to even use Gojo's bodies in ways Gojo couldn't, in ways that would allow him to directly surpass Gojo in something that Gojo had always wanted to have, which is people with him. Yuta Akotsu might be able to figure out a way to use Limitless where it doesn't get in the way of people around him, and he can have strong allies fight alongside him, inheriting Gojo's dream without even Gojo knowing. But these are topics I've already talked about in their own separate videos. However, a new topic that I have yet to talk about is the potential of Yuta Akotsu dying within the 5 minutes or not dying after, mainly because of what had been offered as how Kenjaku's curse sneak could work with Yuta Akotsu using copy with it. For those of you who do not know, when they were talking about the possibility of Yuta Akotsu using copy in order to swap bodies from his body to Gojo's body, a lot of possibilities were thrown out, but a total of 3 of them were thrown out for what could happen after those 5 minutes were up. The first possibility was that Yuta Akotsu would immediately die, mainly because of the fact that it could be possible that Kenjaku's curse sneak requires constant activation. Not even think this one is unlikely, this one is just straight up not true. Mainly because of the fact that we know Kenjaku has used the domain expansion before, and domain burnout is still a thing, so if Kenjaku was really using a domain expansion, should have killed him and stopped him from using that curse technique, but it didn't. Therefore, the first option is not possible at all. However, it's the other 2 options that I think are much more likely to happen, which the second option is that Yuta Akotsu will have to activate the technique intermittently. Basically, after the 5 minutes are up and he will no longer have access to that technique, he will be on a bit of a timer because he won't be able to reactivate the technique again, and once that timer is up, he is going to die. Now, this one is possible, but we don't really know if this one is possible or not. At the same time, we don't know enough about Kenjaku's technique for this one to say if it's possible or not, but it does have some potential of not being possible, mainly because of the weirdness of questioning if Kenjaku sleeps or not, because if Kenjaku does need sleep, then I see this one not being possible, mainly because how can you set up a timer to activate every time you fall asleep, unless the timer is every 12 hours or something. But then there is the one that I see being by far and away the most likely one, which is basically Yuta Akotsu being stuck in Gojo's body, mainly because I just see this one being extremely likely, especially considering the state that Yuta's body was in. As much as I want Yuta Akotsu to eventually be able to return to his body, if you remember what Yuta's body was like, I don't think there's much of a body for him to return to. He's kind of just stuck in Gojo's body. And that's all assuming, of course, he manages to stay alive somehow as well, and he doesn't end up dying to Sukuna, which I'm going to be honest is very, very possible that he actually ends up dying to Sukuna as well. Now, of course, realistically, in this current point in time, I genuinely think that Sukuna should lose this fight. If I'm being real with you guys, Sukuna is missing 3 of his arms, his RCT output should be in the drain and down the gutter, he should barely be able to fight right now, he doesn't have a heart, he's extremely low on curse energy, well, I mean, being Yuta Akotsu level is extremely low for him, but still, He has been going through it, and yet this man is still confident and this man is still smiling. And as much as I would love to say that for those reasons, Sukuna should not stand a chance whatsoever, how many times have we been in a situation at this point where it looked like Sukuna was close to death, but bam, somehow manages to pull himself out of it, somehow manages to figure out a way. After all, this is Sukuna we're talking about. Anything is possible. I'm gonna be real with you guys. Well, of course not anything is possible, but Gege is a smart enough writer to figure out a way to write himself out of this. After all, we thought Sukuna was going to go away when Yuta and Yuji was jumping him, considering how much pressure that he had on him as well as the Jacob's Ladder, but nope, man found a way. So it could be possible that he could find a way here, especially considering Sukuna has another advantage that he has access to that I don't see a lot of people talking about, which is the fact Sukuna already knows how to counter Limitless. While some people, yes, they do believe Sukuna could not have defeated Gojo without Mahoraga or with Mahoraga. That's not important for the debate. What is important is the fact he now has the anti-Gojo weapon. And while some of you guys might be wondering, oh, Sukuna can't regenerate his hands right now, this could very easily end up changing in the fight, very dependent on if Yuta Kotsu actually brings anyone into the domain or not with him, which is why I also think it's going to be very important if Yuji ends up jumping him or not, purely because of the fact that Yuji's the only one who can actually keep Sukuna's RCT output down. If Sukuna gets a chance to breathe, then oh boy, that Space Dismantle is coming back. That's also mainly because I don't think the Unlimited Void is actually going to work on Sukuna for a couple of reasons. It could be because he might use Megami for the sure hit, or he could use Domain Amplification. Either way, he knows how to counter it, which is something else that's very important. Which is also important to mention the fact that Yuta Akotsu also knows how to counter Sukuna's Domain. So while yes, this could end up being a copy of Gojo vs Sukuna, I really don't think it will be, because they have the knowledge on how to fight each other and their abilities, and they can move from that. Also because I think it'd be really boring, and I think Gege knows it'd be really boring if he just copied Gojo vs Sukuna word for word, bar for bar. So while there is the potential that Sukuna is going to get jumped, there's also the potential of this being an entirely different fight, where we get to see how Yuta Akotsu would use the Limitless and how that differs from how Gojo would use the Limitless. Either way, I think this is going to be really cool, but that's not the only thing that I think can actually be tackled. Like, while I do think it's going to be important to see the theme tackled of Yuta Akotsu being used as the example on whether Gojo is the strongest because he is Gojo, as well as interesting ways this battle could go, there are other things that I think can happen in this battle, and other interesting themes that can be explored. Another interesting theme that I can think that can be explored is the people's view of the strongest, the monster, and what is necessary to become that strongest, to become that pillar of society. The reason I think that this can be explored is because of how heavy JJK has been leaning into exploring the entire angle on what is necessary to become a monster or not, and what is necessary to become a calamity or not. All the way back to when Uro had talked about it with Yuta, about why Yuta Akotsu couldn't reach the level of the strongest and why he had peaked, because he wasn't a monster. Which is why a lot of people have been using this chapter to say that Yuta Akotsu had proven Uro wrong, because Yuta Akotsu had taken a monstrous action of taking Gojo's body, as well as deciding to take on the burden of becoming the monster, the same type of burden that they have always been pushing onto Gojo. However, and I do want to say this, there is a very, very massive difference between taking a monstrous action and becoming an actual monster itself, and that is where I think Yuta Akotsu had failed, maybe, in becoming a monster, because I don't think Yuta Akotsu has fully become a monster yet. While Yuta Akotsu taken a monstrous action, he had not become a monster yet. And now some of you guys might also be wondering, why am I saying that Yuta Akotsu has not become a monster yet? And I'm going to go back to Sukuna's speech, where Sukuna had specifically said you should have burnt everything you desired to a cinder, to reach the heights of Satoru Gojo and not worry about your future or identity, but you lacked the hunger to take hold of your desires. This was a speech that was specifically said to Jogo a long time ago about why Jogo had failed, because Jogo had failed in each one of those steps. And while Yuta Akotsu had certainly succeeded in being able to burn everything he desired to a cinder. After all, he had burned his body completely and was willing to take on the role of a monster, mainly because no one else is also willing to take on that role. And he also didn't care about what would happen to his future or identity. After all, he had no idea if he was going to end up dying to this, and even if he ended up not dying, Yuta Akotsu would be gone. He would be Gojo's body at that point on. Who Yuta Akotsu used to be would be gone. And while he certainly succeeded in those two aspects, he hadn't succeeded in the other aspect, because Yuta Akotsu does not have the hunger to take hold of his desires. Yuta Okkotsu still approached becoming a monster in an extremely human way. After all, if he was willing to become a monster, if he was willing to drop everything and become a monster, he wouldn't have asked Gojo, he wouldn't have asked Shoko if it was okay if he took his body. He wouldn't bring up the fact that one of them would have to take on the burden of being a monster. And most of all, and this is something that I think is really underlooked about Yuta, the reason why he was becoming a monster was because no one else was willing to take on the burden of being a monster after Gojo. No one else was willing to take on that burden that was currently on that rooftop other than Yuta Okkotsu, which is why he was so willing to become a monster. Now, I could go much more in depth with this, but my friend That Guy With A Pencil has already made a video covering why Yuta Okkotsu isn't a monster, even though he's taken very monstrous actions, and I recommend checking it out because he would basically say everything that I could have said in this video and more. So yeah, I really recommend checking him out. Anyway, I think this could also end up answering the question in Jujutsu Kaisen, what is necessary to become a monster? Is it only the actions you take, or is it the path you take to those actions that are necessary and important for becoming a monster? And that's assuming that he can become a monster like Gojo, and it's even asking the question of Biff being a monster like Gojo is enough, considering the fact that Sukuna is a monster that goes even beyond Gojo. Sukuna is the ultimate type of monster, and if Yuta Okkotsu is really that type of monster like Sukuna, which if I'm being completely honest with you guys, I don't think Yuta is, and that's where I ultimately think Yuta is going to fail, and why I think Yuta is going to fail, because like Gojo, Yuta Okkotsu is not fully a monster. Yuta Okkotsu still has too many human limits for him to succeed. Of course, though, that's all assuming that Yuta fights against Sukuna alone, and that's where I think it's ultimately going to be decided on whether Yuta Okkotsu ends up dying or not. Because if I'm being honest with you guys, I think Yuta Okkotsu will die if he fights Sukuna alone, and I think the entire 5-minute thing is going to be a red herring, but if Yuta Okkotsu and Gojo's body ends up not fighting alone, which is what I see being extremely likely to happen, I don't think he's going to die. After all, in my opinion, there's no better way to surpass Gojo himself by showing that you can fight alongside other people. Gojo's biggest desire, as well as Gojo's biggest flaw, that he could only fight alone and fight at his best alone. But if Yuta can show that he can overcome that weakness, if Yuta can show that he is good enough with the Limitless to the point where he won't harm the people around him, I think he actually does have a pretty decent chance against Sukuna. Of course, there is also the other issue of Yuta Okkotsu is not going to kill Sukuna. As much as it logically makes sense right now that Yuta Okkotsu should kill Sukuna, we all know that Yuta Okkotsu really shouldn't, mainly because it has been built up this entire time for Yuji to kill Sukuna. Like, I know there are some people who are fully okay with the thought that Yuji isn't going to kill Sukuna, but I also know a vast majority of people, or at least from what I have seen, a vast majority of people would not be okay with Yuji not being the one to put down Sukuna. And this allows us to hop into the other section of what could be possible through this fight, which is literally us seeing Yuji surpass Gojo live, and this just might be Gege's way of literally showing it to us. Like, we might be focusing way too much on Yucho right now, and it might just straight up happen where Yuji ends up surpassing Gojo, which I don't think is going to happen if I'm being completely honest. I don't think Yuji's going to surpass Gojo yet. Well, I do think it's potentially going to happen mainly because Gege had set up that story beat for a long while now. I don't think that's going to happen right now. So while I do also think this is possible, I also think this is by far and away the least likely thing to happen in this entire fight. Furthermore, this can also really serve as a cool callback, mainly because of something else that is very important, which is the fact that Sukuna can't use the Worldless Mantle right now. And while yes, there is the obvious answer of Sukuna can just heal his other arms, well, this can also end up serving as a callback to something that Gojo had talked about a while back when he was in the airport, which is why Gojo had said that if himself and Sukuna were to battle without 10 shadows, it would be close, and why he said that. What he could have seen about Sukuna's cursing that we don't know, because while several people believe we have seen the full depths of Sukuna's curse technique, that the fire arrow was the last thing, it should be remembered, all the fire arrow is the ultimate move. It's never been confirmed that the fire arrow is the only thing left that he has access to. Which means while the fire arrow might be by far and away the strongest attack, I don't think that it's the only attack that he has left in his arsenal. At least that's my theory at the current moment, mainly because I do actually want Sukuna to have more. But at the same time, it might be possible that he doesn't, who knows. So yeah, it could also serve as a callback to that, to when Gojo had talked about that, and it could finally actually answer the question on what would win between Sukuna in his true form without 10 shadows versus Gojo, but at the same time, oh boy, no matter what happens, there's going to be a fan outrage, and I am excited for this carnage and level of chaos, because this is actually having a lot of possibilities for the future. This also could end up being what pressures him to use the merger to begin with. Either way, this has a lot of possibility, and I'm really hyped to see this battle when it comes out. But I want to hear what you guys think in the comments section down below. Maybe I missed something, maybe I didn't miss something. Anyway, I'm a dip. I'm gonna see y'all later. Have a good day.